welcome everyone. Welcome back to the next thrilling instalment of the Agile Kickabout. And this week we have friend and colleague from over the pond, McCall Bagger, joining us. McCall is the Chief Agile Officer and co-founder of Kickabout, based in Alabama. McCall brings a wealth of experience from collaborating very closely with Dr. Jeff Sutherland, the co-creator of Scrum, and he's also led some of the world's largest Scrum at scale transformations. Now, Kickabout has donated over $1.5 million in scholarships and training thousands of learners through their hybrid learning programs. That, and of course, because of McCall's passion. So welcome, McCall, to the latest Agile Kickabout.
Thanks, Ab.
The Agile Kick. Sorry, do you want to say hello before I kick off?
Yes. Hey,
it's like a monologue.
Sorry. Hi, McCall. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Nice.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Early for you, is it? Like
not too bad. It's 9 a.m., so not bad at all.
No, I mean early enough that you could have opened the curtains. But anyway, let's start. So with the Kickabouts, what we do is we try and have some type of conversation about topics that most people either wouldn't talk about, or in some way controversial. Let's say some way controversial. And what we like to do is not know what the topics are before we start. That way it can be properly off the cuff, and it won't sound like something that we've rehearsed. Obviously, we haven't rehearsed this. So, McCall, I have a feeling I can guess what it is, but let's see. Go for it. What's this topic that you want?
Well, so I've been hounding you to have me on the podcast for a while since we met. Really, we talked about it, and I want to bring back a topic that you and I debated in training that we did together. I would love to talk a little bit about big room planning, because I think you and I have very different positions on big room planning.
Oh, I'm sure we have different positions on big room planning. Yeah.
I mean, I think we kind of started to talk about it, but we can sort of begin. I'm here to take on the position of big room planning is bad, and we can get into the details of that. But I think that you probably live on the other side of that.
Okay, I probably wouldn't go as far as saying bad, but I'm open to the challenge. So just so we know, let me try and clarify what we mean by big room planning for the listener. So big room planning, it's a mechanism in agile methodologies, mainly in SAFe. Let's say it's mainly in SAFe, and they call it PI planning, but the other scaling methodologies you can use it, where everyone on that value stream train organization comes together, and the teams plan together for the next increment, whether that be a month increment or a 3-month increment, etc. And the idea is that everyone comes together. We all talk about the plans, we talk about the future, we talk about dependencies, and at the end of PI planning, it's usually about a day or 2 days. At the end of big room planning, it's usually about a day or 2 days. We come up with something that we're going to try to commit to over that increment. Happy with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think we're already starting to see. I'm already starting to see the places where I can really land on this is not a good practice. And I'm interested. I'm looking forward to sort of picking that apart a little bit.
Is it worth us, one of the times that why we started using it back in the day, because that might be an interesting conversation. So we managed a merger between two large sort of multinationals, and we inherited during that merger about 20 teams who all did Agile in different ways, and posted about who was better at Agile and declared they were green. And the reality is we kind of didn't care who was better at Agile. What we cared about is collectively we were getting towards our deadlines, and we found that we were having to bounce between the teams to be mummy and daddy. They weren't capable of talking to each other, and so we wanted to instill some program empathy. So we chose SAFe, but to be honest, any of them would have satisfied it if they did that program level empathy. And we found that those PI plannings, probably within 2 big room plannings had fixed program level empathy. The teams now knew that other teams were clearly dependent on them. They understood the deadlines of the other team. They often knew who the other teams were. So it became less siloed. It became less declaring my team's green and sod the rest of you. And we really quite like that. And so we can talk about post-COVID and some of that stuff, I'm sure, in a second, but that fundamentally was quite a useful thing. What are your thoughts on that?
So this is where we get into I think the nuanced perspective, and I'm going to pull the rug a little bit out from what could have been an absolutely wonderful row. And that is, I'm not actually opposed to getting the team into a room, particularly for a kickoff. In fact, when I do my trainings, I don't use PI planning, but I do use a big gathering. We typically will do a co-training in that moment and a bit of sort of coaching that we start off. The problem from my perspective comes in from continuing to do a big room planning where we bring people in on a regular basis in person, because I think the benefits that you're referring to rapidly decline when we start seeing these big room plannings coming back again and again. And it's extraordinarily expensive, not to mention, as you've already alluded to, post-COVID, it's nearly impossible. And don't even get me started on trying to do this in a hybrid environment where some people are online and some people are in person. So this may be less of a debate than I thought, because I do agree that getting people in place to talk initially, even at the expense of flying people into the same location, is a really great place to be. More than 1 or 2 of those, and then I think you start seeing far diminishing returns for things that you could be doing virtually, if at all.
No, McCall, I don't think you've ended this debate at
Great.
all.
No.
Because
one of the problems with behaviors is, if you do something, you fix it, and teams now mature, they never stay mature. We can leave an organization and come back in a year's time and go, well, why have you done that? Why have you re-centralized testing again? And people change, new people come in, and unless there's a continued mechanism to deal with the churn, then I don't think you can have a kickoff and you fix it. And I think it needs to be continually fixed.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I don't think that you need to continually fly people in for $1 million a day to do these big room plannings in person, especially when, we're all living in this post-COVID environment where there's a real risk to putting that many people in a room together. So the question really comes down to, is the best way for us to make these connections bringing people into an in-person meeting every 3 months or however long, or is there an alternative?
It's interesting to talk about the cost side of it before talking about the benefits and the people side of it. But let's go with it. It's a useful thing, right? And you said it's useful for the kickoff. I'm not talking about kickoff. I'm talking about continuous. Let's call it 3 months. Every quarter, we're going to get everyone together, and we've got to pay for them. We're going to pay for them to come in. Now, the reason why at the beginning when I said it's either departmental or it's value stream, right? And the real benefit of having all of these teams working the same value stream is that we know how much they cost, because we're talking about cost, right? I'm not talking about resource cost money. I'm not talking about that stuff, but we know how much it costs for a 3-month period for all of these teams, call it 10 teams, 20 teams, however we're set up. Now, usually the benefit with big room planning is at the end of it, we have a plan, and yes, the plan can change because we're cool and agile, but assume all that stuff, right? But yes, we have a plan that we want to stick to the objectives of that plan. We want to stick to the outcomes of that plan. Now, if we stick to the outcomes of that plan every 3 months, and we know how much that a quarter costs, let's say for 20 teams, that quarter costs 10 million of your local currency, then charging or paying 50 grand for a 2 days planning, I would bite your hand off if you said for 50 grand you could guarantee that my 10 million pounds/dollars of resource would come up with a good plan every 3 months. I would bite your hand off for that type of money.
Come on. So very different perspective here, and here's why. what you pointed out is precisely why big room planning is not a good idea. That 50,000 pounds that you're talking about bringing in so that people can align on the outcomes and abandon the plan that they put together in the 2 days they were there could absolutely be done, not just disparately, not just from a distance, but also distributedly, so that each team, although aligned around a single goal, does not at all need to be in the same room or even at the same time making this plan to be successful. And to your own point, you can have the objectives that are out there; those can remain consistent. But what you're talking about is getting everybody in a room, and I think you may even build in some locked-in thinking where there is often a resonance in leadership that we've made the plan, and you sort of build in this reinforcement that once we put that plan together, precisely what you're talking about, that pivot to change the approach to getting there, not the outcomes, but the approach to getting there becomes almost problematic, just because we just spent 50,000 pounds to get everybody in place. We came up with the plan, and now that's what we're going to do. That ritual of bringing things in there can actually cause some really bad behavior, particularly on the part of leadership.
I think let's not focus on, I guess, are we going to commit on that six sprint plan or whatever? Because we will, I think, wander away from big room planning, because I know lots of organizations doing big room planning that have no intention or doing far shorter numbers of sprints.
Yeah.
But the big room planning is an exercise in itself.
Yeah.
I think it's graded, and with remote teams, and all of a sudden you see sort of, you know, the cost of transactions, and is that now sensible to have flow of those people in? But I guess, do we all agree that if we all lived next door, if everyone lived next door, and to actually be online versus being in a room, what would be better? And I would suggest that absolutely it'd always be face to face, because of those incidental conversations. One of the things we noticed with some of the remote planning that we were facilitating during COVID, it didn't work as well. And it didn't work as well because of the people going to have a smoke outside, or the people having a coffee, and they were fixing the world in those little breaks.
Yeah.
And it's the same that, you know, I used to be a dev years ago. When everyone went outside to sort of have a cigarette, they fixed the world. So I found myself going outside and joining them and having a chocolate bar, simply so I could be part of the fixed world conversation.
Yeah.
And I think those incidental conversations that happen in an office environment or in a big room, they're important. And I think they massively aid collaboration. So do we all kind of agree with that? And
I agree. I mean, I don't condone smoking, Simon, but I do agree the water cooler moment. And when you're online, you don't have the off the cuff conversations, the bumping into people conversations. When you have an online meeting, even now when you have a normal Zoom meeting, it's you turn up to the meeting, you do your meeting, you finish the meeting. The chat is coming back. It's getting there. We're getting better at online meetings, but the chat has gone. And imagine there's hundreds of people in a room. You don't have that kind of chat, which is where all the good stuff happens. I don't think that happens if you're,
because we know quite a few firms that are dumping safe, and they're even dumping sort of, you know, planning 6 sprints in advance, or 4 sprints or whatever. But they're keeping the big room planning. They're changing it so it becomes a little bit more like a town hall, like a collaborative town hall. But they're keeping it because of that post-COVID world where everyone's working at home. To be honest, how do you form those important networks and connections with colleagues that you'll rely on over the next quarter to deliver stuff? And
go ahead.
Sometimes I think if everyone is remote, just having that event to pull everyone together, I think that in itself becomes important.
Yeah, but see, this is exactly that we've now lived through the pandemic, and that has to be part of our perspective here too. So if nothing else, I will not deny, and have not, that a gathering at some point to create a relationship, a bond between people, absolutely true, really, really important. I live in Baltimore and my business is in Alabama. One of the things that my fiance has trouble understanding is why I continually go to Alabama. So am I undermining my own point here? maybe, but my my recommendation for my clients is and has and will continue to be, unless you convince me otherwise, that initial creation and perhaps a reconnection for personal relationship building is important. But it is not true that doing that at the frequency that we're doing it and for 2 days and specifically for this outcome. So the function of big room planning is necessarily the best or the only way to do that. And in fact, post-COVID, many companies are doing quite a good job of creating virtual spaces that do precisely what we're talking about here and make the space for those cooler conversations. My office uses something called gather.town, and I'm sure there are other better ways out there, but it looks like a video game, right? You have a little office in your building. Our particular office is built on like, I don't know, like a floating cloud something. And you can move around between, co-spaces where you're going to work, or you have your desk and you can move around to talk to other people. So there are ways to use virtual tools to solidify those in-person interactions, to allow those to occur without forcing your employees to expose themselves to COVID. Look, every time I've traveled since COVID, I've come back home with maybe one or two exceptions with an instance of COVID. I've gotten COVID so many times because I have to travel and be around people. That's becoming an irresponsible tactic to begin with. But the second part is I don't think it's the only way to do the thing we're talking about. So there's a pattern. I'm sorry, maybe I'm getting too far ahead. The last thing I'll say then is there is a pattern that Dr. Sutherland put together in the scrumplop.org website with some other coaches called not spooky action at a distance. It's called quantum entanglement. And the idea is when you create these connections in person, and they do need some in-person time to be created, they can be carried over for some time to replicate great success at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's go with I love the idea that there are other ways to do it. Right?
Sure.
So when I'm talking big room planning, I'm not always talking physical. I much prefer physical, right? But yes, physical or even digital. And I think that gather.cloud you said sounds good. But the idea that we can all, so we're talking peer-to-peer kind of relationship. Now I want to bring in the other one, which is our leadership, management, seniority.
Yeah.
The one-ups. I have an example of doing it was PI planning, and I'm not going to say the location because that will give it away who the people might be. Okay. So we had a developer who was being asked to do 2 releases in the same sprint, and being asked by the CTO of the organization, large organization. And the developer changed it out to the developer. Developer says, you definitely can't do both of those 2 things in the same sprint. Change back up to through 4 or 5 people to the CTO. Yeah, no, I definitely want it. Chain back, no, he definitely wants it. Chain back up, no, you can't have it. And the RTE at the time, partner of Genesis, Darren, took the CTO to the developer and said, just talk to each other. And it did take about half an hour conversation in a room where the developer went, this is why you can't have it. And CTO went, oh, fine. Now you've explained it to me. I get it. Split it by whatever the resolution was. I put it that you can't do that unless you're all in the same room. You can chain those conversations, but that conversation would chain over at the best a number of days, but most probably a number of weeks before because what would happen is CTO says it, we'll just do it then, and it would end up with, well, fine, I just have to do this, and then it goes wrong, and then something breaks. So we had a resolution within an hour to a problem that I don't think you could do within a week without big room planning. You scrunched your eyes, so I think you've got something.
Well, what you're talking about is a conversation. So I'm still not sure I understand why it is that, and if we're talking about the big room planning event, you're talking about a conversation that could absolutely just happen over Zoom. So there were two challenges in the instance that you outlined. One is your CTO didn't trust your product owner to represent what he had requested to his team and come back with an answer that was capable of comprehending what the team member had said. So there's a trust issue there that for sure I'd be looking to. But the fact that the two got together and had a conversation is absolutely not exclusive to an online environment or to an in-person environment. We just
it's the rapidity of it. It's the organizing. So
right.
when you're all in a room together, you can suddenly go, actually, let's get the architect involved. Or we have one with a trading engine where the algorithms hadn't been thought through properly by the traders.
Yeah.
And bang, there was a whiteboarding session where there was a half-hour whiteboarding session where the traders realized, okay, we needed to put a little bit more thought into it. We've done it. We've explained it to the team. It's the fluidity of those being able to summon that, which could, as Ab said, take days or weeks as you organize the myriad of conversations or all the different parties that you need. There's a level of organization that isn't needed if you're all in the same room. You can be flamboyant, you can be ad hoc, and I believe it helps speed up delivery. Well, it helps speed up those conversations. At least you know who it needs, because in some organizations you've got so many people and there is a high level of churn, and these are not fixed people that we have a relationship with where those relationships are carried forward. It might be you've got two brand new teams, and in large organizations there is a level of change that I think that sort of bringing together needs to be regular for you to just know who it is you're interacting with at the moment.
So you had asked earlier, Simon, for us to divorce two concepts. One is that ever being together and making contact, or even doing that regularly, is helpful, and I won't deny that. That quantum entanglement pattern, it's been studied, that is true. But what you're describing is a moment for people to dedicate to having these conversations, which does not require the expense of flying everybody into one place. And in a global organization, that's often quite a bit more than 50,000 pounds. And second, that there is a dedicated, so it doesn't require that. So a dedicated time, and it doesn't expose our team members to the risks now of being physically in person if we make that time virtual. So there are other ways to do that. For example,
we played with some of those tools.
Yeah.
And they're okay, but I would say there's 10% of the capability of what you would get from real life.
What are we talking about in this case? What are the things that were?
What was it? Was it Gatherly.io? There was a couple of different ones where there were the ones we played with where, like you said, you've got a little icon and you're moving around, where you move around and actually sound increased. So as you got closer to another group, so another group were there, you would start hearing their conversation, so you could remotely walk around the room. Another one we played with was VR. So everyone, I mean, this was horrifically expensive because everyone needed a VR headset.
Yes.
And we did seriously look into it for a while until we realized just it was cost prohibitive. But
we did the same thing.
And the feeling was they're okay and they can do a little bit of what you can do in person, but they can't fully do it.
Yeah.
And it's the question more now around like transaction costs when you've got like a test team in the Philippines who maybe have poor quality sort of like links to the outside world, so therefore you now have to batch up testing, and you're now back to old sort of waterfall style testing purely because of distance and time and technology. Is maybe it starts becoming a call where if everyone's next door or lives in the same town, face to face becomes more sensible. If half your dev team are in sort of Brazil and half are in India, things like big room planning start becoming insanity.
Okay, so now we're getting to a really interesting topic. So now it seems like the discussion might be one that has lived in the agile environment, the agile space for a long time, and that is every team would be better if it were in person. But the question then is that feasible? Is that even a reasonable position for us as agile consultants to take, that your team should be in person in these global organizations?
Ab, you're muted.
Ab, you're muted. Yeah.
Now that happened. I've been saying some wicked stuff, and no one's hearing it. Let's assume then. So your teams teams get on with each other. The individuals,
yeah.
whether they're remote, hybrid, in the office, but they talk to one another. The team of teams, they don't all speak together, often. They come together at these planning events.
Sure.
I'm making an assumption.
Yeah.
So it's those planning events where you get the real value, because everyone can talk to everyone else. If we're saying that can happen, that can happen at the beginning, and we're happy, and you think that those relationships can then continue,
Yeah.
then this starts being about relationships. So let's go with, we all know it's better to be in person than it is online, right? Let's all agree that. But purely from a planning point of view,
Yeah.
purely from a get everyone together, make a big plan. Are you saying that you did, and we've only got a few more minutes, we'll have to start tying this up, that you disagree with the idea of everyone coming together in a big room, whether that's virtual or whether that's in a football stadium or in a big room?
Yeah.
You are against the fact, the idea that everyone comes together, makes a big plan, and then disperses back to the teams, or you don't want it to happen physically because it's expensive?
I definitely don't want to bring them in physically, but I am against the idea of bringing everyone into one place to do it, even virtually. Even to say we are going to put everybody, all 100 people, in this Zoom room, and manage it with breakouts or something. You'd have separate conversations. I would argue that what you're dealing with there is an insecurity that exists in leadership to trust the teams that they have. So it may be helpful to make that connection one time, but you've got to build in this trust between leadership and the teams to be able to figure those things out. And you can do it all with representative sort of chain feedback that's asynchronous instead of one time.
Yes, yeah. But remember that leadership aren't there to whip the teams because they don't trust them. Leadership are there to support the teams, to give them what they need, to answer their questions.
And
not
interestingly, the thing that we used big room planning to fix was not management to teams. We already had that. The big thing that it fixed for us was team to team, because they were, before that, and I think I've noticed a lot of teams remotely creeping back to that way of working, where they escalate stuff up. And actually, the first question would be, have you spoken to them?
Yeah.
Go and talk to them.
Yeah.
Where when we started big room planning, that became their default thing. And so instead of the old world where you needed mummy and daddy project manager to have everything escalate, and they would go and fix your problems for you, actually, discuss it. Here are some options for products and sort of, delivery to consider, mainly product with prioritization. And now we make priority calls. So actually the teams I would argue that it helped them start crowdsourcing plans and crowdsourcing, options and fixes. And it meant they needed management less because of it.
It's the neural model that Jeff Sutherland wanted in Scrum at Scale manifest physically. How can you not want that? I'm surprised. Listen, go, keep going, go.
Okay, so I know we're going to run out of time, but the last thing that I'll say is, and I'm not going to make this about one framework versus another, but the challenge that I think many organizations have is the prohibitive cost of bringing everyone into an in-person place, and now the health risk. There are simply going to be people that can't do that. So if an organization must rely on this extraordinarily expensive and potentially dangerous method of getting people together in one place to do the things that you've described, then they're failing to create the culture of empowerment and accountability that is necessary to have a healthy organization in the first place.
I love that as a summary. I really do. We obviously haven't managed to persuade each other to the other side, and maybe we need a version 2 of this. I'm definitely up for having version 2.
That's a great talk. Yeah.
I tell you what I'm interested by. So the growth of bespoke ways of doing it. So we saw last year in the sort of state of Agile, safe and Scrum at Scale and, vying, jockeying. And this year, with the additional option of we're doing something bespoke, we're going our own way, that massive sort of change in approach. I would love to see which bits organizations have cherry picked.
Oh, that opens up a whole new interesting conversation about whether or not bespoke transformations can actually be successful without a whole lot of professional guidance. So there's a whole other debate.
That's it for this week. So see you next time on the Agile Kickabout.
Bye.
Bye.